Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second video of this series on Finance and Economics Matter. With me, I have Professor Madhu Veeraraghavan. He is the Pro VC of MAHE Bengaluru campus. He's also an avid researcher and a teacher in the area of finance. I am Professor Abhishek Rohit. I work as the Associate Dean Academics of TAPMI Bengaluru campus and also a Professor of Economics. Today, in this video, we are going to talk about the most hotly debated topic today, which is India's union budget, which was read out on Sunday. And we'd like to discuss beyond the basic things which have already been talked about in the news outlets. So, Professor Madhu, if you see, this particular budget is not a populist budget, and therefore markets also crashed. If you talk to any general person on the street, they will not be happy with the budget. But as it is claimed, this budget is a strategist one. What do you think has been the core idea behind this budget?
Okay. So thanks very much, Abhishek, for having me. And I'm really enjoying this already. I'll just go back to the sort of fundamentals of how this budget was actually conceived. So if you look at the last three budgets, more on the consumption side. This year, the government decided to focus on the supply side, right? So I agree with you. It's not a very populist budget, although three elections are coming, three state elections, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu is going to happen. Kerala is going to happen.
What have you imagined here? UP is in the next year.
UP next. What have imagined that, the government have thrown a lot of money in these states, but very smartly, they have not done that. I think this budget is more about three kartavyas, as the FM pointed out. One is, how do you sustain economic growth, real good, strong growth? Second, job creation, and everyone in this country should be, well off and all that stuff. And third is very inclusive development. On these three bases, and linking it to Viksit Bharat 2047 is how this budget has been formed. So my view is it's a very balanced budget. Of course, we'll discuss in detail more about the specifics. I see this as a very masterfully crafted budget. I know the market did not appreciate the fact census down by 1,000 odd points immediately. That's okay. But if you overall take a commentary on this, my opening remarks are this is quite a good budget.
One of the key pointers in this budget has been about fiscal discipline.
Yes.
Something which seems to be an outlier in today's world where globally economies are sitting with excessive debts. One of the key concerns that the opposition has been raising that with this level of fiscal discipline, you are for sure going to cut on expenditures on social front and on various infrastructure fund. Given the objective of 2047 Viksit Bharat, is this fiscal discipline the correct way to go?
Abhishek, you're an economist. I'm an economist. I'm sure many of them will be watching could also be economists. I don't think there is any doubt that fiscal prudence is absolutely necessary. From 4.4% we come to 4.3%. Now, is it the cost of growth? I think the RBI governor talked about Goldilocks budget. You have a fantastic real GDP of 8% and you have inflation of 2%. You can't get any better than this. But if you look at the nominal GDP, it's still in single digit. It should be around 12% or whatever. And the RBI's budgeted inflation is around 4%. We are not even there yet. Now, the flip side of this budget is somebody could argue that, you're talking about a real GDP of 8%. Your nominal is 7.4. Nominal is only 8%. So you have more economic weakness. I think the fiscal consolidation, the fiscal framework of keeping the deficit at 4.3% is actually good. And what it does, Abhishek, better than anyone else. What it does is allows the private sector, a lot of loanable sort of funds to be able to borrow. And that's something we should do. The government is quite clear that we don't want to cross this sort of threshold of 4.4%. I think that's a very sensible thing. And also look at what's happening around the world. There is a lot of uncertainty. In that uncertainty, if as a large country as India is able to have a fabulously structured fiscal prudence, fiscal discipline, and yet grow. There are some very specific numbers I can throw during your questions. But one number is the, capital expenditure. 12 lakh crores. That is just a phenomenal amount of investment the government is wanting to make. So I think this is very important. Have a long set budget. The fiscal discipline is absolutely critical.
One of the ways that the government has tried to manage fiscal consolidation and still managing to get good employment numbers is by focusing on manufacturing. Now, this is something which we know that the current government has been doing for last few years when they started with Make in India scheme. And now they are focusing on design and IP. We know from research that any policy, unless backed up by good institutions and governance, ultimately fails. And therefore, even though there is a push for all the 7 sector manufacturing strategy, there's a good push for MSMEs as far as their business is concerned. Do you think that without a clear focus on the quality of institutions and quality of governance of these institutions, all these process modifications and innovations will be able to see the fruitful goal that they want to?
This is a tougher question, and I think I couldn't agree more with you. You look at what's happening to the MSMEs. The MSMEs are now struggling because they're not able to get enough funding. They're not able to, many of the payments are delayed. The government is now talking this budget about ensuring that, MSMEs payments are made on time. They don't have access to green finance. There are many issues with MSMEs. I think they play a very important role. The middle sort of problem that we have. I think the manufacturing sector needs much more push. And I don't think we've been able to do that. The government has been trying a lot on semiconductor. They've been trying to get Foxconn. They've done all those sorts of stuff. But if you look at how we are headed, I think there's a long way to go. And I don't think we have put enough money in this. The government has definitely cut back on a number of points, but to cut something on MSME or to cut something on manufacturing probably is not the right way to go. I think that is where a lot of the growth is going to come. So my view will be perhaps, next budget, they will probably relook at this. But I'm not sure enough justice has been done to this particular sector.
Especially when you look at it from the perspective of how global competitors are doing in manufacturing with our neighbor.
Look at China.
Yeah. So given that the China's focus is heavily on manufacturing, it's now a world-renowned manufacturer. I think the current focus of expenditure that we have done for manufacturing may not be enough to do justice to the goal that we have set for us.
Absolutely. I totally agree. China has now been pumping and dumping a lot of their stuff, and they are just manufacturing like crazy. I don't think we have taken serious note of what China is doing. Of course, the government is cognizant of this, but I certainly think this is one sector. This is one area where not much attention has been paid, or maybe little attention has been paid. I would have loved to see. You set aside 2,000 crores for a self-led. That is absolutely nothing, right? For the MSME sector, manufacturing sector, without those MSMEs, things don't really move on. So I would have thought a 10,000 crore fund. These kinds of things really don't add much weight. The Self-Reliant India, or they've now put 10,000 crores to grow the MSME sectors. It may be a small start, Abhishek, but I don't think this is good enough. This is certainly my criticism of the budget on the sector. There are other aspects that they have done well.
One of the important kartavyas that they have talked about is capacity building. And capacity building is also important if you're focusing on manufacturing, because you have to skill your youth. Given the way AI is transforming the workforce today, do you think that the steps that have been taken to re-energize and skill up youth, they are enough, or there's something which needs to be done for the education sector as well?
Yeah. See, another excellent question. So if you look at last year's budget to this year's budget, there is a 10% increase given to education sector. Okay, good start. But have we done enough? So what are some of the key things the government is doing? They're saying, we're going to have 3 Ayurveda institutes. We're going to have a National Institute of Design. We're going to have 5 university townships. We're going to have a 500 crore Center for Excellence for AI. That is very, very small. To me, you balance your budget between fiscal and your social side. Your health, education, welfare has got to figure in this, right? 1,40,000 crore budget for education, I think, is very, very small. I think that needs to be much higher. So let's take 3 or 4 things. You spoke about skilling. So the government is definitely on about skilling people. They want to make sure the talent is absolutely generated. All good. But 15,000 colleges and schools, they're going to have creator labs. That's very, very small. I know a budget cannot do everything. It's a financial statement of a government, of a country. But this sector, again, I feel has been hard done by. And I say this because I come from this sector. I don't see much money being put on research. I don't see much money being put on innovation. Yes, there are some good schemes, but those schemes, are they good enough? Probably not. 5 university townships, logistic hubs you're creating 3 Ayurveda institutes, Institute of Design. That's all a good start. But out of love, just take a small example, Abhishek. See where China was in 2014 in terms of number of publications. I have the Nature Index data. And where is in 2025? They're 10 times larger than India. Similar populous country. In fact, they don't even have the power of English language. How is it China can produce 10 million papers and we're producing like less than 2 million papers, right? So there is a real problem in the way we're also looking at research. The productivity, the amount of funding that should come, a National Science Foundation sort of a stuff is not happening in this country. And that is my absolutely large criticism of the education sector, the way they've budgeted this education sector.
We had been work on a research work on innovation in products and processes some time back. And then this question is around that do you think enough has been done to ensure that innovation in products and processes takes place? Because without innovation and relying on the previously set norms and processes and supply chains, do you think the economy can become a developed economy by 2047 without focusing on innovation, the amount of R&D expenditure that they're putting?
Absolutely. It's brilliant question. There is a very interesting data that recently got released on the R&D spending. South Korea spends 5% of GDP. We're spending 0.66%. It's mind-boggling statistic. It's mind-numbing to see that we're not actually investing in R&D. The Prime Minister said research and development for the nation. Absolutely brilliant. Look at ANRF. A classic example is ANRF, which has now said we got 100,000 crores to be given away for fantastic research. Great start. For this year, they got 20,000 crores. But I'm not sure how many great projects have been submitted, where the money is going. We don't have much clarity on that. My other concern is also about the number of doctoral scholars who come out of this country. And where are the outputs? And by outputs, Abhishek, I'm not talking about papers. I'm talking about, have you been able to convert some of these PhD theses into something very specific, a product, a patent? And look at the number of patents we produce in this country compared to South Korea, Argentina, or China. We're way behind. There's no Singapore and Hong Kong are a million miles ahead. So I don't want to say it's all bad, but as an economist, I'm wearing the hat of an economist, I'm saying to you that the government has not done enough in putting money where the mouth is, and which is to promote innovation and R&D. That is unless we go to 2.5% of GDP to do this, we are not going to achieve the 2047 vision of Viksit Bharat. We definitely made a great start, but it's a long, long way away.
Globally, one of the other critics that isn't coming is that the geopolitical risks that the world is facing today and the protectionism which is being seen all across the globe, especially the 50% tariffs that the US has imposed on India, which is hurting MSMEs significantly. Are we doing enough to support that sector and the economy overall so that it's well suited to the current needs of geopolitical risks?
See, we signed the mother of all deals with EU. I think we signed the father of all deals with the US today, where the tariff will come 50 to 18%, which I think is a great achievement for the government. I think the Prime Minister is being lauded, and rightfully he should be lauded, because the US was trying to play a lot of games with India, trying to pressurize. And India really stood firm, saying that we are not going to be able to sign this deal until the tariffs are down. So tariffs will come down to 18%. So, which is a good start. Now the question of yours is on MSME. I think there is a lot more to be done in the sector. So 2 points. One is a 2,000 crore self-reliant fund, a 10,000 crore MSME equity fund that they put together. Maybe a good start. But you look at all the mandatory government processes that delays the payments to MSME. They're struggling for finance. And when MSME, the middle problem, when MSME struggles, it is not a good look for the country. The micro enterprises, the small medium enterprises, if they are actually struggling for finance, access to finance, that tells me that there is something definitely wrong. There is a red flag, and the government needs to really address this issue. They have done 2 or 3 good things, but there's a very high input cost that is also hurting the MSME. So whilst the MSME is trying to grow at a good pace, there are 2 of these stumbling blocks that's actually stopping them from going where they should be. And if they don't, then we have a real hit on the manufacturing side, and we'll have a cascading effect on a 2047 vision of Viksit Bharat. So to me, they're absolutely interlinked.
One of the key challenges that MSMEs have been facing in India for the last few decades is the cost of capital that they get when they go for NBFCs or banks. They face very high cost of capital in contrast to large corporates.
Yes.
What, as a finance researcher, what policies do you think would be put in place to ensure that MSMEs are also able to receive funds at a nominal cost of capital?
See, currently the government is basically saying that, no, we'll put together some money for allowing you to grow. 10,000 crores is what they put in this budget. But, to me, some of those are very notional amounts. If you really wanted MSME to grow, then I would have thought about, at least a good 30, 40,000 crores or even more, putting in there and saying, we're going to give you interest, I'd say 4%, some subsidized. See, you've removed subsidies elsewhere. Right? That's fair enough. But I think here to not concentrate on them, to me is very I'm not able to get my head around it as to why we are not providing them a scheme when we really want them to grow. So I would have thought, the government of India would have come up with some very interesting schemes like, 4 or 5% or whatever they want to give us interest, and probably have a small holiday for these MSMEs. There are many interesting things that can be done. And for some reason, they have not done it. Perhaps the economic survey also didn't sort of indicate that much. Maybe in the next budget, we will see something because I'm sure the MSME will also be approaching the FM or the ministry to say, look, we are really being hard done by in this budget. I just think there's a lot of attention being given to manufacturing and MSME. Abhishek, if I were the FM, or, I'm sure Ms. Sitaram will be presenting the next budget as well. So I think she will probably have to focus on these two items, on these two heads.
Moving from manufacturing to the financial sector, which is also the bedrock of any good economy's growth. Banks, we know in India, they are highly stable now as compared to what they were, let's say, around a decade back. In terms of recovery, in terms of bad debts, everything has been going on improving. But how do you see the future of our banks when you compare it to how the global banks have been doing in the size and the volume of operations they have been doing? Because India cannot become a developed economy until our financial sector is competent enough to compete with good banks all across the globe.
Brilliant question. So I don't want to talk like a politician. I'm not one. So let's just say, let's just look at the last 10 years. I think it's a really good period. Let's look at what the government has done the last 10 years. Forget the budget for 1 minute, the consumption side, the supply side. Look at the reforms they've got, which we have not spoken about in our conversation today. But some of the long-term reforms the government has done, it's really, really class. The Insolvency Act, the Bankruptcy Act they've introduced. The GST, for example, has come in. I mean, many of these are structural reforms that will actually help the economy. And I think, Abhishek, you look at the GFC, you look at even the COVID pandemic, you look at other like dot-com crisis, any of those crises, South Asian crisis, going back in time. Our banks have largely been immune from these. Largely because we have a good balance sheet. We were probably careful about, some of those very advanced derivative products that were coming into those banks. Some of those Western banks were involved in a number of things that they probably should not have done it. But I think we've been very protective and we were very careful about how the banking sector was run. Now, too much of cautiousness also means that you're not able to give any credit. Bank's job is to advance credit, and that's probably where the government is saying, hey, you guys are not doing this. If you're not doing this, then where are people borrowing from you? So I don't want to sound extremely cautious, but I certainly think, that we've made a wonderful start under all the three prior governors, right from Raghuram Rajan to Shaktikanta Das and all the current governors as well. I think we have done a really good start about tightening the reforms and making the banks globally credible.
Yes.
I mean, you look at the number of bank disasters, Abhishek, in this country, vis-a-vis looking at the US. The other closest country, continent that comes to my mind is Australia, which has got a phenomenally strong banking sector. The Westpac, the National Australia Bank, the ANZ. None of those banks had any problem when the GFC hit because they were very tight, right? So I think India has got some excellent banking systems now. But I think it's another, 4 or 5 years as we develop through this. See, the reforms is something that many people are not happy about. And what government is it if it doesn't do reforms? Until you bring in some tight reforms, you will have problems. And this government has to be lauded, really lauded, for taking the opposition on head on and saying, we will bring certain tight reforms, you like it or not. And those reforms are necessary. So if you want to go to 2047 without a very strong financial sector, there is no way in the world we can achieve it. And the government is well aware of it. And that's why you look at the bank profitability, Abhishek. Look at how many banks are making losses. I mean, look at the NPA, how it has changed the last 10 years. Look at the economic offenders, defaulters who have actually run away after defaulting banks. They've all been brought back. So there is a will of this government to say, if you are going to defraud the public exchequer here, you are going to pay a price, whoever you may be. And we will fight all courts to bring you back. I think that has to be lauded from our perspective to say that we will no longer accept you doing these kinds of things. So I think that sends a very right message as well. So that would be my take on how the banking sector is going.
One of the other important weaknesses of our Indian financial sector is with respect to its corporate bond market. Right? We know this when we do research in finance that we're always focused on advanced economies because Indian corporate bond market data is missing. It's not deep enough. It's not deep. And some of the reforms that the government is doing to ensure that corporate bond market also gets deeper in India. Why do you think is, for the benefit of our audience, why is corporate bond market, the depth of corporate bond market important for a growing economy?
So if you look at all asset classes, I mean, the bond markets are play. I mean, if you look at the US, for example, the bond markets are much more deeper, much more stronger than the equity markets, right? When corporates are issuing bonds, most of the corporates in the US have done very, very well in the issued bonds. In India, we don't have a very deep corporate bond market sector. But I think also the government bonds, if you look at that as well, when the government is issuing bonds to raise a lot of money for a number of other activities, that market is also not very deep. I think this is one area, one class, one asset class for me, where as an economy, as a country, we have not focused. Corporates have been very comfortable raising equities. They probably go to the US and say, I've listed in NYSE, I've gone into FTSE. But for some reason, the Indian public has not been very comfortable saying, actually, it's a safer investment. I mean, I understand.
Less volatile.
Yeah, less volatile. Perhaps the Indian investor is so greedy. They're saying, in a bond market, I'm going to get X% coupon. But if I'm investing in equities, probably the upside is unlimited for me. I can, if stocks are making money, I'm making money as well. So, but there is not a lot of sophistication or investor education that's happened. And I think it's also up to the stock exchanges of the country to talk about why corporate bond markets are necessary, how we can grow, how the companies can raise money at a cost. Equity cost, as you and I know, is not very simple. There's phenomenal requirements, mandatory requirements, if you want to go to NYSE or FTSE to get listed, right? It doesn't come easy, and not every company can get listed also. So I would have thought that there'll be a lot more information or education coming in from the corporates of the day. I mean, there are some corporates who are issuing bonds. This is not that they're not. But your point is absolutely valid. The depth of it, we have not even scratched the surface. And you see, there's no research also happening in corporate bonds in India. Whereas if you look at the US or look at Western economies, people do as much of equity research as bond research, right? But that we're not doing. So there is also patchy data. There is not much data available. I mean, I can go back to your question on R&D. Because of really, really bad data that we have in this country, not much research is actually, other than a couple of known databases, we don't have great databases. You could, in the US, you have TAC, you have, a lot of other foreign emergent FISD, which actually gives you bond-wise, yield-wise. I mean, you name it, you get the data. That level of granularity in data, Abhishek, is conspicuous. And when that is not available, we're not able to do good research, and that doesn't flow back into regulators. For example, some of the research that we do and other academics do should also go back to the regulators, to standard setters, either to a SEBI or to standard setters and say, hey, here's what we're finding something interesting. Even that is happening only in bits and pieces. Not much of the research is taken by regulators to say, out of the RBI, to say, wow, this is very interesting. I think we've learned a lesson or two. That insight that we should provide as an academic, I don't know, that's also missing. And even I'm equally to be faulted for this.
The last important kartavya that Nirmala Sitharaman has talked about is about equity and inclusivity. Yeah. And they're focused on mental health, they're focused on women's health, they're focused on child health. Yes. I think that is also an important direction in which an economy has to move if it's growing. Because we know from the prior experience that many a times when a country is growing, even though the GDP numbers may be growing, but in per capita terms, inclusivity terms, the people at the lower section of the society may be
marginalized.
Yes, marginalized. Do you think India is on the right path as far as inclusivity is concerned as compared to other economies? For example, in the US and all, the talk is that while the country has grown, but if you look at the marginalized class, they are still suffering. Yeah. What should India do to ensure that India doesn't follow the same track?
It's a really, really good point. I think this is a really difficult question even for the FM who prepares the budget. But I'll tell you what the government has done in this budget. You look at, on one hand, you look at the fiscal deficit and the balance that they have. On the other side, you look at that sort of social welfare that you have. So you look at what's happened to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. There's a 10% increase compared to year-on-year budget allocation. Is it enough? Probably not. I think that should have been much higher. The second thing is on tribal welfare. The government has also put a lot of money there. There's been a reasonable increase. The third is on differently abled, as the Prime Minister calls Divyangan, and women empowerment. On all of those areas, the government is willing to now put the money. But Abhishek, you and I know Rome wasn't built overnight. And neither is this government going to get it right the first time. It's the 9th record budget that FM has presented. And no doubt she'll present many more. But each of these budgets has had something very interesting. So in this year's budget, they've actually focused on this very important question of social welfare inclusion, and you balance the fiscal deficit. It's not easy because the government, if they wanted to really go out in an election year, they would have done a number of things. Splurged money in Tamil Nadu or, West Bengal, they've done all those things. But they actually haven't done it, which gives you that credibility that the government understands what they're doing, right? They are now wanting a lot of private players to come in. They want to make sure women health, mental health, family welfare, all of that is looked after. Giving 150,000 crore budget for a size of a country may not be sufficient. There are 2 or 3 sectors, Abhishek, education and health. And manufacturing, of course, in my mind.
R&D.
R&D. Absolutely critical. If we get these 4 areas right, there is no stopping India from achieving the vision of the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, of 2047. There is absolutely no doubt we will make it. But these 4 areas, in my view, are damn critical. And R&D is something that's really bothering me as a country. In the last 60, 70 years, we haven't done much, but if you look at the last 10 years also, our patents, our IPs have not really increased. You look at the US, look at other countries, look at Scandinavian economies. The amount of innovation that comes out is just phenomenal. South Korea, 5.6% of GDP is on R&D. Why are we spending less than Argentina sometimes? 0.65% of GDP. I mean, that's a minuscule amount. And yet we talk about we want to create research for the development of the nation. That's Prime Minister's very famous quote, and I love that. He said, do research for development of the nation, which is exactly what we should be doing. But I would like the government also, somebody's watching, to say that let's put more money in this. Let's put more money in, providing more schemes, providing more opportunities for excellent R&D to take place in this country. That would be my point.
So with this, we have covered all the 3 kartavyas that our Honorable FM had talked about. We come to the end of this discussion. Any final remark that you'd want to make in addition to whatever we have said to our audience?
I think the one comment I would like to make is, we've been very smart and strong in the way we've run the country in the last 10 years. There's been a lot of difficult such times before. But I think over the last decade, the way the fiscal deficit has been handled, the way inflation has been brought in check. And some of the reforms, Abhishek, which hopefully in the next session we can probably discuss some of the long-term reforms the government has done. They really are making India today very strong. The Indian foreign policy is mighty strong. Imagine the US had to come and say, we will now do a deal with you. The government said, we will do nothing with you. There is no way we're signing a deal. 50% tariff to 18% tariff. And that magnificently, the father of all these got said, this is a government that's got the willpower. This is a government that's got a large spine. This is a government that's phenomenally strong. And it wants to position India as the top 3 economies in the world without a question. And I have no hesitation to say that this government understands the economics, it understands the infra push, it understands the growth story, it understands the long-term economic sustainable story. It is not here to please people of a certain state. In this year's budget, Abhishek, they have not given any special status to any state, neither have they splurged money on 3 states where the government actually wants to be in power. Any other government would have actually put money in West Bengal, would have put money in Tamil Nadu, knowing well that Tamil Nadu, they stand a little chance, but with a lot of alliance partners, they could have made it. Kerala, of course, very little chance because UDF, LDF will always have a fight. But despite that, the government said, we are not going to do it. We're going to manage the budget. We're going to have a lot more infra and revenue expenditure. You look at debt to GDP. Debt to GDP was almost 56, 57%. They brought it down to 55%. Look at the revenue expenditures, capital expenditure. At one point, the government was paying salaries 82%. Now it's come down to less than 72%, whereas the capital expenditure has gone from 13 to 26%. So the government is phenomenally clear about how they want to run the economy. I think that is a very, very credible thing. I congratulate the Prime Minister, the FM, and all the Council of Ministers for preparing a very interesting budget. People say it's lackluster. There are 2 sides to any coin. Arguments will happen from both sides. But as an economist, as an academic, as a citizen of this country, I feel that this is a very, very good beginning for the next 10 years as well.
Thank you, sir, for also joining us and providing us insights about Union Budget 2026-27. I'm sure we'll meet again in the 3rd round of discussion on economics and finance matter. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Have a wonderful day.